Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Hope Bolinger, author of Blaze. Hope, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me here.
How did I do on that pronunciation?
Oh, it was totally fine.
All right, just want to make sure. As I mentioned before, it's kind of a running joke. We always tend to butcher a name, so hopefully we made it respectable there. So Hope, let's go ahead and get started. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
I think that's a great question. I would say don't give up. I know there's a lot of points in an author's journey where it's really easy to want to throw in the towel. I started writing novels around 16, and it took me 5 years and 17 novels later to finally land a book deal. So that would just be my number one advice, would be just to keep going. When it's feeling the most desperate and you're in the most despair, you're probably closest.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
No, great question. Working as a literary agent, I would say some of the most common things I'm seeing is that someone's platform has to be really strong. They have to have a very strong social media presence. They have to have a lot of speaking engagement. They just have to be interacting with a lot of readers on a regular basis. So now it's not even if you're a really good author, because people can write a lot of really great books, but it's also who can you reach right now. So it's changed so much in the past, even 10 years, that authors have to take on a lot more roles than they used to.
Well, I think you bring up the biggest point with publishing, because there's so many people out there. They still think they can just write a book and then you're going to have a publisher that does everything for you. And they don't realize is that traditional publishers now are recruiting authors that have an established platform, whether that's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, but they're looking for people that have that established platform. So that way the traditional publisher does not have to mess around with the marketing. They can just get the book published, and then they expect the author to still do the lion's share of the marketing. And I think that's probably the biggest eye-opener for anyone that's looking to share their story with the world, whether it's a business owner for a fiction book, business book, or nonfiction books, or fiction or cookbooks or anything else, is the realization that you are expected as the author to do the lion's share of the marketing.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. I definitely discovered this along the way too, because when I first got into book writing, I was just thinking, maybe I'll just sit down, write a really good book, keep editing it, and then maybe people really want it. But that's absolutely right. They're really looking for people who already have that readership. Some publishers just aren't really willing to take a risk if, for say, you don't necessarily have that social engagement. They are balancing so many numbers that they want to ensure that they're taking a good risk on an author.
Well, this will tie nicely into our next question, and that is marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Yeah, no, really, that's a great question, because I'm in the middle of the marketing section of my book launch right now, because it's coming out around June. I would say a couple things have proven to be really helpful. One is following industry hashtags, especially ones that are pertinent to your genre. For instance, I'm following one known as Novel 19s on Twitter, in which all young adult and middle grade authors who are debuting in 2019 are using that hashtag. So a lot of people who want to host people on blog tours who are debuting, or people who want to review books in that genre, use that hashtag and are asking authors who are of that genre to send stuff to them. So that's been really helpful. Another thing that I found to be really helpful is blog tours. Just meeting up with a lot of bloggers who really like to host authors on their site that get a pretty decent following, and then they just ask you some interview questions, or they have you do a guest post. I found that those two have been the most helpful so far, especially when marketing a fiction book.
Well, you mentioned following industry hashtags, so can you tell us a bit more about that process?
Yeah, it's honestly just being on social media a lot and discovering what those are. Am writing is a typical one
Yep.
on Twitter, or am querying. Yeah, definitely, those are definitely huge. They differ based on the platform. So if you're on Instagram, for instance, writers of Instagram is a pretty popular one, and then there's
Hmm.
usually genre-specific ones. So for instance, if you write romance, there's going to be a specific one for romance. But it's just finding those hashtags and engaging with people who are using those, and that usually can build a following and get people really interested in what you're writing.
Yeah, we actually had a guest on the show recently, and she was talking about specifically the am writing hashtag and the impact that that's had with her journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a really popular one. A lot of people on Twitter have built very strong platforms just by using that. By participating in other things on Twitter, such as Twitter pitch parties, you can really gain a strong following, and also you can interest agents and publishers who are participating in those. For instance, I think there's one coming up even tomorrow, known as Pit Mad, in which people can pitch their books, and if an agent is interested, they can like their tweet. And so not only can you gain a following, but you can actually catch the attention of industry professionals.
So, how does a Twitter pitch party work?
I love Twitter pitch parties, so I'm so excited to talk about this. So what a Twitter pitch party is it's a pitch party for a genre-specific pitch. So, for instance, sometimes there are ones just for children's books. There are some for nonfiction. There are anything you can think of. They have a Twitter pitch party for it. And you can honestly do a Google search for Twitter pitch parties, and they'll have lists of them. But what you do is during the time of the event, often it'll be 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock, depending on the time zone of whoever's hosting it. During that time period, you're allowed to pitch your book in a 280 character tweet. And then you're allowed to pitch your book a certain number of times per day, depending on the rules of that pitch party. And if an industry professional, such as an agent or a publisher, likes your tweet during that event, they're basically saying you can jump over the slush pile and send it straight to my inbox, and I will take a look at it right away. And so it's a really great way to be able to jump over that slush pile. It's a lot of fun, and also I've met a lot of my own personal clients through Twitter pitch parties.
I have never heard of this concept before, and I'm a publisher. I absolutely love this concept.
I mean, I do too. I actually just when I was getting started on Twitter is kind of how I got introduced to it. But a lot of my clients who I found through it are really great writers, but I might not have necessarily found them if I hadn't been using that social platform. So honestly, I want to say I represent about 20 clients now, I want to say. And of those 20 clients, I want to say I found about 15 of them through social media. It was either through, I just noticed that they posted a lot and they got a lot of engagement, or it was through a Twitter pitch party.
Well, for our listeners that are listening to the show right now, I think you guys all need to get on Twitter and research these Twitter pitch parties. Now, do they also have these on Instagram as well, or is it just specific to Twitter?
I'm just seeing it specifically on Twitter, but there are on Instagram. I get very excited about social media, but on Instagram there are usually follow loops. So on Fridays they'll have different genre-specific follow loops. For instance, they might have one for fiction writers, or they might have one for poets. But if you look on Instagram for what these follow loops are, and you follow everyone who follows this loop, they tend to follow you back. And so you can not only get introduced to a lot of people who are in your specific genre, but it's a really great way to build a following and build that community.
Just to kind of wrap my head around it, what exactly is a follow loop?
Great question. I'm trying to figure that out myself because it's a relatively new development for me, but usually it's by a host. So, for instance, let's say there's one for romance writers. One host will follow a number of people per week, and they tend to unfollow after the follow loop is over. But basically, if you want to participate in this follow loop, you tend to have to follow every single person that the host is following. And they're required to follow you back as part of the rules within 24 hours. And then usually if you participate pretty regularly in this loop, you can build a following pretty quickly. But yeah, that's just something I've learned in the past couple of weeks, but I'm just trying to figure out social media all over the gambit right now. I kind of got Twitter a little bit figured out, but Instagram is definitely a whole other ball game for sure.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest thing with social media too. Everything continuously evolves. Initially, it was just having posts out there, having content, and then you have Instagram stories, and you have all these different things that you can utilize now. Plus, you have Snapchat. You have, I mean, I'll tell you what I utilize is because I can't keep track of all these different social medias. So basically, what happens is my VP of operations, she uses Buffer. So that way she gets it out via Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, somebody got to follow. So it's like one thing that you can post on it goes out to all of those different outlets because it's just, it can take a whole beast in itself.
Right. I mean, I would even add to that, TweetDeck is really great too if you want to tweet a lot, but you don't necessarily have time to be on Twitter all the time. That's a really great resource. Hootsuite is also one where you can do multiple social media platforms and post all at the same time. There's another one called Meet Edgar.
Yep.
It does cost some money. They have a free trial kind of version, but it does cost some money, but you are able to post literally thousands of posts, and you're able to generate a lot of content through that. So I would definitely highly suggest hopping onto one of those platforms that can get a lot of content out at once, especially with just being busy and everything. It's difficult to be an author already, let alone trying to build that platform on top of it as well.
Yeah, and for platform building, these different services are great. As I mentioned with Buffer, we looked at Meet Edgar, we looked at Hootsuite, and we just found for what we're wanting to do, Buffer was the best fit. And I think we're spending like $15 a month. And the nice thing is you can get everything scheduled out up to a month in advance. And it just makes things so much easier, especially with our company because we operate a lot on systems and processes where we're trying to get everything done, like content for a month essentially done in one day. That way we're just not going through the entire time. But it sounds like it's well worth looking into these Twitter pitch parties and also the follow loops as well. Because those are things that I have not heard on our show. And you're actually episode 263. So the fact that you're the first person to bring this up, that's quite impressive.
Yeah, and I mean, I would even add, just find which social media platform works best for you. For me personally, I built a pretty strong following on LinkedIn before I started building the other ones. But I would just say sometimes some people work better with other platforms than others. I found people who just did Pinterest and nothing else, and they built a very strong following from that. So definitely try to tinker around and definitely don't paint yourself too thin. I think a lot of people see all these new social media platforms, these evolving platforms, and they want to jump on all of them immediately. But I would say stick to your 3 most solid ones and just build from there.
And that is great advice. So Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and I'd also say LinkedIn too, because LinkedIn has been a game changer for our business.
For sure.
So cool. Well, I know we took a little deeper dive into that, but I really appreciate the content. That was great. And I love Writers of Instagram hashtag, Writers of Instagram, Authors of Instagram, the Am Writing hashtag. And there's so many great ones out there that you can use that really does help build a following. You just have to make sure you put those hashtags in after the end of the post.
Right, absolutely.
Well, Hope, what is your favorite book? And what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Ooh, this question is always so difficult because I feel like I'm picking a favorite child.
It's the hardest question.
I would have to say Great Gatsby is my favorite. I'm always a sucker for classics just because I always like to know why they became famous or why they kind of withstood the test of time. The biggest thing I learned from Great Gatsby was to make every single detail important and memorable. A lot of times I'll write or I'll receive submissions in which the writing's really good, but it seems like certain words were kind of just haphazardly tossed in there, or people just kind of use synonyms because they couldn't think of another word. But Great Gatsby is just such clean, tight writing. I just really want my own writing to reflect that. And I'm sure it's not there yet at all. I'm definitely not F. Scott Fitzgerald, but it really is a nice bar to kind of set for all future fiction that I will write.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you too, Gatsby is one of my all-time favorites, and it's just so vivid. And when they actually made the latest version of Great Gatsby with DiCaprio, and they had it available in 3D, I was really able to connect with that in the theater, seeing everything in 3D, the parties and everything, because that's how I envisioned the book when I was reading it.
It's such a good. I really love that version of the movie. I loved every single version of the movie I've seen, but I think that really just captures all the details for sure. I love that movie.
Well, for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
I would have to say I have a lot of really favorite quotes, but it comes down to Sylvia Plath's, "I love my rejection slips. They show me I try." I know I'm young. I'm 22 years old. I've only been in writing for about 6 years, but even in that amount of time, I've gotten literally hundreds of rejection slips. It just is a reality of the business, but I love that quote because it's really easy to walk away from a rejection slip and just be in despair, but I really love that it's saying you tried. You really put yourself out there. You did something that was scary, and it kind of encourages you just to keep trying, keep knocking on those doors, and eventually one of them's going to open.
Well, Hope, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
I would say the first place to go would be my website, hopebolinger.com. Bolinger is Bolinger. Google likes to put 2 L's into it, so just the one. And then if you do Hope Bolinger on any social media platform, you'd be able to find me pretty quickly.
Well, Hope, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.